Mama Baba, a baby Shumpukita, Habatok, Yashiniti Matia, Imina Kuzmama, Ikashan Badi, Kabashima Imino, Suzuki Kashan, Mrs. Shabasu, Samuna Kashmashi, I need to do it,
Welcome, followers of Indigenous media. As you all know, today is one of the events that marks the International Day of the World Indigenous People. In the world, there are about 470,000 Indigenous peoples worldwide, and these are groups, communities that are marginalized, discriminated against, and also are not protected by legal regimes in some countries. Africa, our continent, has a number of indigenous people. Uh, Ethiopia as well has about 20 million indigenous populations, occupying about 60% of the landmass of the country. And today, I will be joined by two distinguished guests to talk about the situation of indigenous peoples and how they see this particular day in the indigenous people's struggle. So I will bring my guest to introduce themselves. Let me begin with Dr. Tadese. Dr. Tadese, you are a special guest always on this, and I know for those people who do not know you, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you, Nika, for inviting me and joining the discussion with you and Khalid. I'm pleased to be here as your guest. I am a researcher at the University of Oxford in Oxford, United Kingdom. I am a Gamo elder and also serve in several trustee roles in the representing the African continent at the Indigenous Peoples Assistance Facility at IFAD, where we make several grants for African indigenous people, including some Ethiopian groups. And the Global Biodiversity Fund, where I serve in the trustee, an organization that works in conservation and the protection of the environment in the High Atlas area in Morocco. And I serve in the board of several other US-based organizations. My interest in indigenous people has been settled from my own origin as an indigenous person, but also my personal life rooted in rural Ethiopia in the southern part. And my studies later as a researcher, working on my PhD research with peoples of Lake Stephanie, especially the Arbore of southern Ethiopia and their friends and neighbors, the Boran, the Hamar, the Tsamai, the Dasanich, and other submerged communities like the Wata among the Boran. So this is, it's been a big honor for me to come from the community I come from, but also to be speaking and to have studied those communities and to speak on their behalf at some of the global fora. So I was able to attend some of the United Nations Indigenous Peoples international meetings in New York at the United Nations headquarters, and the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change in Anchorage in Alaska, and Indigenous Food Festival in Turin, Italy, and several other events really, as part of my work with the Christensen Fund that took me around and gave me the opportunity to serve indigenous people in Ethiopia and Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tadese. Khalid, the opportunity is yours.
Oh, really? Thank you very much for inviting me and participating in this show with such a doctor, Dr. Tadesse, who is well known and with a big contribution in the educational field and in the academic field. And I think he has contributed to the world a lot. And we are very proud as Indigenous to have someone like him. And I myself, I'm honored and privileged to participate and be with him in one panel and in one show to talk about the Indigenous, which is I'm proud of because I myself am from Indigenous people of Benishangul, and we are, I'm an activist, and I have been talking and fighting in all aspects of life for the rights of my people, the Indigenous people, and the Indigenous in the world as well. And we are happy to be participating in this show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlemen, I think we are marking an important day in the struggle of the indigenous peoples worldwide. This day means a lot. Before we proceed to exactly to the details of the nitty-gritty of what this day signifies, could you please talk us through this indigenous, what is happening in the indigenous people's area where you come from? Dr. Tadese, what is happening in the Gamo area?
In the Gamo area, as well as among their neighbors, life goes on. This is harvest time is no the harvest actually cultivation work is now almost done, and people are prepared to celebrate their annual um, celebration of feeding themselves a lot, dancing and singing. It's referred to as Maskala. It's a period of celebration in the mountains where all the animals, after the pastures have been closed for the last 2 months, would be open for the animals to go free. And young herders go home and take rest, and they also have been saving barley and have saved money to purchase a bull, so they will be slaughtering bulls and would be feasting. So it's a time for feast for the animals that are provided manure, for animals that have been plowing the fields, and also for young herders who've been taking care of the animals around home and in the mountains. So this is an annual event, and it's everybody who's been away weaving in the different parts of the country come home for this celebration. Newlyweds come out to public after 2 months of seclusion and feeding and singing among the heat in small constructed houses, simply because it's a cold season, so you need to constantly keep the fire going to keep them warm and feed them with nutritious food. That's barley porridge, cracked barley porridge with fenugreek spices and butter. So this is a period of celebration, really. Regardless of what may happen on the ground, you cannot miss it. You must celebrate it. You must eat, and then you proudly look at the fields everybody has been working on, and the crops thriving and germinated and so on, and wait for the harvest time or weeding time sometime between now and the harvest time.
Beautiful, Dr. Tadesse. That is a memory worth knowing and worth living to see again
Mhm.
in those environments where we come from, because that reminds me of my traditional childhood, where freely you move around, you enjoy life in general in the indigenous area. So, Khalid, you being from Benishangul Gumuz, can we know what is happening?
Really, the amazing thing is that the indigenous culture doesn't. It's not that much different from Ghana or anywhere in the world, because it's the same thing. You know, people go to the and now, and the good thing about Benishangul, even we are very rich of with with the songs and the cultures and the celebrations, and for each occasion we have different songs and the different celebrations that we celebrate. And as for example, at this moment, people are, just as the doctor said, that people are harvesting now to the harvest time, and this time there are some special songs for this time now, and you can see that the song that you have shown, how people are, the guy singing in the farm and he's happy, and the people, when people were sitting on the floor, on the ground and singing, they were asking for rain. They were asking for rain, and they want rain and all the thing. So in Benishangul now, you know, people after the harvest, people go to, in a few months, in 2 months from now, people get married. And as he said, that you build houses, you get married now. And because, the harvest, you sell the harvest, and then you go and you get married, and people dance and celebrate. And because everybody is no hunger, no one is hungry at all, and everybody has his own food. And there are many many things really our people do, and especially in terms of dancing, celebrating, getting weddings, and socializing. This is the best time because everybody is rich. Yeah.
Thank you, Khalid. That is the life we all have lived. And actually, in terms of the music, we have listened to the indigenous peoples in the Benishangul Gumuz region. Basically, this day that we are marking today is a very long journey for the indigenous peoples worldwide. The indigenous peoples across the world have a struggle to be recognized as people, to be protected by law, their land rights, the environment, their culture, their identity has been at the bottom line of the issues. And this day is very crucial and very important for the indigenous peoples across the world. Why do you think that this is so crucial for the African and in particular the Ethiopian? How significant is this day for this group of people in Africa, Dr. Tadeze?
I think it's important because we are part of humanity. Um, as part of humanity, all the problems humanity faces, we suffer. We also are part of that problem. Every solution humanity provides to problems, we also have the opportunity to gain from. We have, I think, a big mass of land. So indigenous territories extend all across the pole, northern Canada, the Scandinavian North Polar region, extending all the way to Siberia and the land between, and in the mountains and valleys of Central Asia, in the Aboriginal Australia and Native American first communities, and Native American communities in the USA and the different regions, states of the United States, living in reservations, and many indigenous populations in Latin America and Central America. So there's no place where there are no indigenous people. And we are part of close to 80 million people are indigenous. And they have around 80% of biodiversity globally. And they have nurtured the landscapes and environments intact. And have always warned us that anytime we fiddle with our environment, that would be a recipe for disaster. And that knowledge has been there much before we became conscious of what the consequences of environmental disturbances are. So Africa's indigenous populations share the same faith like every other indigenous people. Some indigenous people have been since the United Nations Indigenous Peoples Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, have seen changes in their lives, like in Scandinavia and Canada, Australia, and some other parts. But there's a long way to go for African indigenous people. And there's a long way for many other indigenous people. And the problem with indigenous people is the resources they have kept intact. So when resources have been used up elsewhere, so these are the targets now for every resource exploiting institutions to move to. And in this scramble, many have suffered, many have perished, and many have been labeled as, with different kinds of crimes. And this has, diseases in the past have been introduced to wipe out indigenous communities. The African region have been depopulated in order to get slaves to enrich the plantations in the Caribbean and the United States. And Native American lands were depopulated in order to get land for sugar and cotton. And so and various kinds of diseases were introduced to have that effect, to have that kind of thing benefit from their territories. So that is still there, but many improvements have been placed, at least in terms of policy of the United Nations. And I think the UNDRIP thing has been supported by 144 nations in the General Assembly, and 11 were opposed to it and 4 abstained. So, or is it 4 opposed to it and 11 abstained? So there's still a long way to go. And Africa is experiencing, its indigenous people are experiencing some of these problems bit by bit. But unlike in the past, governments are, I think, watchful of their responsibility. They understand their responsibility, and in the dealing with these populations, they have some standards that they have to fulfill. And I'm hopeful that as we go forward in time, this would be more refined, and that rights of indigenous people would be more protected, just like everybody else's in those countries is protected, or more or less protected. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Tadesse. Khalid, similar pattern. Benishangul, part of Ethiopia, is an indigenous people's territory. Benishangul is part of Africa. This day marks an important day for the indigenous people. How is it significant to the indigenous peoples of Benishangul and also to the rest of the continent indigenous people?
Well, as we know that the indigenous, as being mentioned by the doctor, that they are part of the world, and these people they occupy vast, lands, and in fact, there are many things that, especially in Africa, hasn't been recognized, that the contribution of the indigenous people to the peace and to the land and to the stability of the region. And especially in Ethiopia, the problem of Ethiopia as a country is still they don't recognize the indigenous as indigenous in their own lands. And for us in Benishangul as indigenous people, we are facing the same problem and the same fate that are faced by many Africans, indigenous Africans. That is marginalization and exclusion. And for us in Benishangul, the the governments, always, if we say as that the world has, just taken a lot of indigenous people from Africa to work in the plantation in Caribbean and in America and all these areas. We know that the Ethiopian governments uh, have taken many people from Benishangul and from Gambela and from Lao Omo and all these indigenous people. They were taken and they were serving these highlanders in their houses, and our areas are emptied by those people who were displaced from their areas and they taken, like for us in Benishangul, we have some people in the northern Addis Ababa where they are settled there, and they were taken a long time ago when Benishangul was invaded. And so the impact of the governments and government policy and the elites on us as indigenous people is massive and hugely affecting our lives. And sometimes people talk about the development in Africa and the peace in Africa. And I don't think that if the marginalization and exclusion policy is still going on, I don't think that the policy to make peace and stability and development is going to happen in Africa, because these indigenous people, they are not the same indigenous people who were 100 years ago or a century ago. These people now, like Dr. Now Tadesse, who's a well-educated person and who internationally recognized for his research and all these things. And you are there also having this media, the indigenous media, where you talk about the indigenous and you talk about many issues, different issues. And I'm here as an activist. And so the indigenous people who we thought the government dealt with 100 years, they are not the same people today. These people are educated now, and even if they are not educated 100%, but still there are some people of them are educated, and so these people, they are not going to be to keep quiet. Whatever the government is doing there, violation of their rights on their land, by selling the land, by grabbing the land, by making development without the consent of these indigenous people, all these things are going to be revealed to the international community. And we know that the United Nations Declaration has mentioned, the United Nations Declaration has clearly mentioned it in the declaration that any program or anything that the government is doing or implementing in the indigenous area should be with the consent of the indigenous people, because the elites of any country, especially in Ethiopia, and the government are trying to destroy the indigenous people. And until now, we in Benishangul, for example, we have this, for example, the sugar plantation in Jawa area, where now people massacre being committed because they wanted to be displaced. And we know that what is happening in Lower Omo, where sugar plantation is. And we saw also around Africa, we know that the Kalahari people also are facing, and indigenous people in Botswana also are facing. But although they won a court dispute in 2016 regarding their area, where it was a reservation, and the government wanted to took the land from them, but they took it back. So, as indigenous people, we have many things to do, and we have a lot of challenges. And these challenges is including the exclusion also, and politically, socially, economically injustice, which we have to fight, and we have to work hard to get our rights and protected for our indigenous people. You go, Mr. Nikel.
Thank you, Khalid. Both of you mentioned a very crucial and a very important document, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And precisely, I think Dr. Tadesse was right. when you said that there was a great support for the document, but some countries, including our country, Ethiopia, was not present. It was absent during that particular day. Similarly, the Ethiopian regime also of the past, I think, has not been part and parcels of the important document, the International Labour Organization Convention, the ILO Convention, so which is also very crucial for the struggle of the indigenous people. Uh, why would you think that Ethiopia seems to be not in line with this crucial international document? And how can they, given the fact that there are about 20 million indigenous peoples in Ethiopia, how can this be, brought to line in terms of the international legal norms and legal regimes? Dr. Tadesse.
Yeah, this is a very controversial issue, the question of indigeneity in Africa in general. And there are various arguments which we should take into consideration when we discuss indigeneity. One thing is, the question arises from one group of Africans saying, who is not indigenous in Africa? So how do you answer that? They say, we are indigenous, we are all indigenous. We recognize all individual rights of our citizens. Any person can travel abroad, can join school, can learn the national language. So we offer every opportunity we offer to our citizens. So we do not discriminate on the basis of your life way, on the basis of this and that. So this is one argument. I'm saying this is an argument. And the other group, emerging group, like my brother Khalid says, look, and I also sometimes say, we are indigenous. And therefore, we deserve special right. But what I see with my case is, look, and where I did my PhD, there is education infrastructure, transport infrastructure reaching there. Sometimes I think in some places better than in central Ethiopian areas. And so the argument is, well, we're not being excluded. Do we get as much as we want? No. Is our language a medium of instruction? Yes, it is. So for that reason, from the time of Edgat Bahebret Zamacha, you remembered, it's been alphabetized. So alphabetized with 15 other Ethiopian languages, excluding Amharic. So I see whatever thin opportunity there is given, provided without any exclusion. But again, there are other things on the rights of land and so on. And to be fair, the decree on land that made land state property did the most unfair thing to holding of private land in Ethiopia. By private, I mean community as well as individual holding, with tenure that allows individual holding. What the 1974 land decree has done is it replaced the landlords with the new landlord, that's the government. So land became the land owned by government. As you know, land comes just like humans. It has pre-existed the nation state. But suddenly the state comes and becomes the owner of land. And so I think the logic has gone wrong at that point where land became state property rather than belonging to communities and to their members, who would have used creatively their lands to be productive to pawn in the banks and take loan and develop as they like. But as you've seen in the last, in the 90s, late 80s and 90s, there was this scramble for land with things like to develop fossil, not, what is it, whatever fuel from plants and so on, plant-based oils for run as source of energy. And this led to many destabilization of African societies. And so we see all the unfairnesses that have been. And I think there are also efforts to redress that, efforts to acknowledge that these have been mistakes and to improve them. But the redressing of these issues has been rather slow. And I think we need to unleash the creativity of people across the continent and look at the situation in Kenya where land is private. But that also is never a guarantee that you'll have your land for yourself. Someone else can come and just keep buying your land, and then the conflict in the early or late 80s in Kenya was arose in relation to land, that many people started becoming landless. So I think striking a good balance and really leaving the state in its duty of collecting revenue, ruling, and repressing should be underlined. And then let the public deal with land and ownership. So what we need is, rather than really talking about the past evils, which remain evil, and I think I'm one of the products of such evil, as my friend Nikau knows, but I think we live in a different era, and what we need to do is to build a new Ethiopia where this is taken into consideration, and that fair and sensible tenure that does not change with the change of government occurs. And so we should all try to teach one another, to persuade, to influence government and policy, because many of the UNDRIP things happen through persuasion and in the corridors of power, in parliaments and so on. And if you wanted Ethiopia to acknowledge UNDRIP and to endorse that document, the only way to go about is really to persuade the leaders to say, this is what has kept us tied, We want to be free to develop. We'll be partners with the state and other forces in the country. And we have the knowledge, we have the wisdom, we have everything you need, including the land. So do not kind of hold it so that us benefit from it. And, you see this project of planting millions of trees. We can also say, look, we've got so many hectares of forest in our territories. Can you please enforce or decree a law that will protect these forests, our sacred sites, our forest lands, and our beasts and animals live in them, and the birds and so on. So I think there are lots of ways of dealing with this, because as you see in the country now, sore points have made it difficult to talk on any issue. And me, as an elder of my community, I think we can't persuade. There is no one that cannot be persuaded if we extend our ideas, or if we share our ideas in the right platform, in the right time, and in the right tone. Because elderhood and wisdom of indigenous groups lies in these basic things. The indigenous people have wisdom, are peaceful, and they're often referred to as peaceful societies. There is a book dealing with this, with the title Peaceful Societies. So what is happening is the tone of even indigenous young people is turning sour. And, it doesn't help the elite, it doesn't help indigenous people, it doesn't help mainstream society. And we're seeing the danger where it's leading. And no one will be victorious in that. But with wisdom and consultation and with good way of communication with people in power, I think we can make change. We can also have conversations with different international bodies in the same manner, because some of the international organizations are the ones that grab land in some of these places you were telling us. So it's sometimes it appears that our governments are doing some things, but they don't do them alone. There are international institutions who really focus on land in other places. So that's how I see it. I think so. The idea is really the question: who is indigenous is not answered, because everybody thinks we are indigenous. The definition of indigeneity is a different story, but it can be claimed by nearly all of us. So how do we say who is and who is not? And those of us who say, how do we deal with the issue in an indigenous way, without militancy, without creating anger on both sides, on the side of indigenous people, without making them militants and allowing them to go and die for something they may not succeed. So how do we minimize whatever it is that is required to secure this in a very peaceful way, with the power of the word and persuasion and intermediary institutions? I think humans have the power to appeal to the minds of others, and to show their pain and to share their pain in a nice way. And maybe this is the influence I had in the UK. This is a country where you can't easily, nobody will make you angry without any, people are nice speaking. Even their pain they will share in such a way that you can feel the pain, but not the anger of the pain. I mean, the person was incurred pain. That's how I see. So I think the situation could have been worse, but it's getting better. That's what I see. We have a court in, where is it, in West Africa. In Kenya, indigenous people have taken their government to court. And this is a civilized way of, dealing with issues legally. And there have been decisions that have been made by the court. And there have been decisions that were also, after a few years, being reversed. I think I hear about 1 or 2 cases in Kenya recently. And there are other cases going on now, like near Masai Mara, where some investors have taken Kenyan sacred sites. And so the conversation continues. You know about the Alaskan case? This was a case, Alaskan indigenous people, they've been strong enough to say no to the extraction of petrol and so on in their land. But now recently there's been a document signed by the president to extract petrol and then have the big pipelines. I think that's what I heard recently. So when you think the world is a good place, then such decisions kind of like a bang take place and then rewind the efforts of many years. So situations sometimes do not appear to be changing, but we see them changing. And I'm very positive these things, it's painful, but these things would change. And for me as an indigenous person, minimum risk is always the best. Conversation and talking are the best ways to deal with people in power. Because if you really look at indigenous people, they are powerless, let alone indigenous people. Mainstream societies find themselves, as you've recently seen, victims of, all kinds of evil. I don't know. I don't want to just say itemize what these things are, but you have been seeing that you've followed the news and so on. So I think we have to be grateful that we are not at that kind of worst thing, simply because of the location of our populations. We are far out from centers of power, and when two powerful things go into conflict, like when elephants fight, the grass is most affected. That's what we hear here. So because of our marginal locations and marginal way of life, we may be lucky that we're surviving the most difficult times, some of the most difficult times.
Thank you, Dr. Tadese. I think the controversy of who is indigenous people or not will continue.
Mhm.
I think the African
Mhm.
Commission on Human and People's Rights have set some minimum criteria based on the status, economic and political status of these indigenous people, in particularly marginalization. As you pretty well said, that our status is not the same with the mainstream group of people. Discrimination also is another, and lack of infrastructure where the indigenous peoples are. And of course, as I said, the debate will continue as to how this definition of indigenous peoples can be addressed, in particularly in those contested area where everybody thinks that he is an indigenous by virtue of being in the continent or in the region. So, Khalid, what do you say about this lack of participation on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People of Ethiopia, and also the fact that Ethiopia is not yet a party to the ILO convention?
Yeah, that's interesting too, because for me, I think for Ethiopia, for not being part of that, I think it is more politically motivated, and that's what I think. From my perspective, I think it is more politically motivated because when you see that, what is Ethiopia? Which Ethiopia are we talking about? If we talk about Ethiopia, which was formed after the Menelik invasion to all these areas, and and then conquering all these areas, and this area they have their own indigenous people. And when you go to Low Omo, they have their own, and the Hammer there, they are their own culture, their own tradition, their own you know, just their own lands. And for the Ethiopian, when they refuse not to recognize on the indigenous, and even the question that who is indigenous, that question cannot be in Ethiopia, because even in many African countries, because everybody, especially in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is the only country where we find that some people who came from the highland came and took over, and then they imposed some rules. Even they imposed their they appointed and as themselves as guardians for each part for each part of Ethiopia. For example, if you go to Benishangul, for example, before the fall of Mengistu, and we find these highlanders who came there and who were brought there. Uh, they have their own school. School were built in Benishangul, for example, for the settlers. and the hospital were built for them, and the roads and something and anything that was done in Benishangul before Mengistu, before the fall of Mengistu, was built for the settlers, while the indigenous are marginalized. They are not allowed to. No school for them, no hospital for them, no road for them, no job for them. They are not represented at all in any sector of the government. The settlers come and they represent themselves, but they don't represent the indigenous people in that areas. So it is. I think that's why I think it is more politically motivated, because they want to say we are all the same, but we are not the same. When you control the power, and the government and everything, and exclude me from the government system and from everything, how would you consider yourself, or could put me out? How do you put me on the same level, as you are? You are different. You are well educated. You have the power. You have everything. So that question of who is indigenous, I think it is not a valid question. And although academically it is valid, but for an activist and for politicians, I don't think it is a valid, because we know how the indigenous are marginalized all over the world, and that's why, as indigenous people, for example, the Hammer people in Ethiopia, they are used as a tourist site. Instead of going and developing these people and making a lot of development and trying to use the money that the government generates from the tourism and from all this income from lands and from projects, sugar plantation or whatever they do, instead of making development and trying to teach these people and educate them about even to be proud of their culture, to be proud of themselves. The government is using these people as a site for tourism to generate some revenues and some money, and they don't care about them. And it is right that we are minorities. It is right that we are powerless, but it doesn't mean that we have to stop fighting. And fighting, it is in all aspects. And as the doctor said, that, yeah, I agree with you when you say that, we have to talk and we have to negotiate and we have to try and talk to them. But the talk which we strive to make with these people, whether in Ethiopia or any area, it needs a government that allows the civil society organizations to be active, and the activists to speak and to film, and this and but unfortunately, in a country such as Ethiopia, it is not the same like Kenya. For example, in Turkana area, after the Gilgil 1 and the Gilgil 2 was built, constructed in Ethiopia, the people of Turkana were affected by that. And there are many activists in Turkana today. They speak, they write, and even they went to court and they went to the international organization complaining about this. But in Ethiopia, today, if I go, for example, as Benishangul person, and talk about the impact and how the Renaissance Dam is affecting my people, and how the indigenous people land and the livestock are being destroyed by this project, and even the sugar plantation in Jawa area, what it is doing to the indigenous people, especially when we don't see the indigenous people employed and in these projects. These projects are serving those elites and those the government supporters, and even if you are from the indigenous people who are supporting the government, you are not going to get any share. That is the only problem that we have, and that's why we believe, I believe, that we need to work hard, and working hard. It is not only uh, in the field of opposing what is the government doing. We have to talk to the government, yes, but the government has to open the door for us. We are open at any time. I think the indigenous people, wherever they are open for talk. But the only thing that they find is that the the government that blocking any activities that is concerning the indigenous people, because they don't want to recognize that, because they are controlling the lands of the indigenous. And if they say that we are going to recognize the indigenous activities and the indigenous land, that means they are not going to have the same power that they have today. And for example, when you say the state, the land is owned by the state, that means you took the land from the indigenous people and you have the power, and the indigenous have nothing to do with their land. And the government can do whatever they want without the consent of the indigenous people. Um, and because but as indigenous people who are outside of the country, the only thing I think we need to do is by talking, and and uh, and in such media, and at the same time, making connection with some organization and some NGOs, and explaining what is going on in our areas. And but in general, we need also our culture. For example, when we talk about a country, when we talk about Ethiopia as a country, we don't see our culture. Culturally, we are marginalized. Our histories and our experiences, and no one from the indigenous people are allowed to come and talk about their own culture. When we see the TV, the TV in our countries, we see only one culture people talk about, one music that people talk about, although we have rich culture, but no one is ready to talk to us or to reveal our culture. We need the government also to support. We need the government. If the government is a well democratic country, a government where everybody can work and can for the interest of his own people, I think people can make movies and can also make many things that can show our cultures as indigenous people. We need to reveal also our history before and after the colonization or the subjugation. So we can tell them that this is how this land was before, and this is how this land became now today. And because we indigenous, we respect land, and we land is very precious for us, and the environment is very precious for us. For example, in Benishangul, we don't allow our people to cut trees. And we know that in Ethiopia, you go in many parts of Ethiopia, people cut land, not trees. But in Benishangul, historically, we don't cut trees. And our environment is well protected by indigenous. But unfortunately, when the highlanders or the settlers came, they come and they started cutting lands, cutting the trees, and with the support of the government. And the indigenous have no any power to resist and to stop that. So, and we have to encourage our young as the indigenous. We need if the government could allow our people to do a lot of activities. There are many things to be done, like encouraging the young artists to portray our cultures and artists and show their talents and the historical and our cultures throughout the history. And also, the indigenous people can be organized and publish books and regarding the cultures and the indigenous people in Ethiopia, whether they are in the south or the north or wherever, instead of just being used as a tourist site. Um, and also taking the case in the case of Ethiopia, if indigenous people had the opportunity, I think we could have taken our cases, especially in Benishangul and the Low Omo, and even those areas that were affected by the schemes and the projects. For example, in Benishangul, we could have taken the government to the court, but unfortunately, There's no any democratic government that can allow us to do that, as it is happening in Kenya or in Botswana and South Africa and all these areas where people are allowed to go to the court and fight, peacefully. And that's where the indigenous the problem comes, because if the government wanted to implement any development project in any areas, that is going to be very hard, because the indigenous people are affected, and they are not going to keep quiet. And even if it is not peacefully, if they didn't succeed peacefully, they will use all the means to stop what is going on. For example, in Benishangul, when we take the Renaissance Dam project, which was built in Benishangul now today, we have seen that the previous government, what it did, all the land that was inhabited by the indigenous people, they came and they distributed this land to the highlanders in Addis Ababa. And those people, they haven't seen the land, they were not there, they didn't live there, they didn't visit it even. They just give them the land that is close to the waterside. And then those people, they went to the banks and they took money, and that all this land which is on the water side now, it is owned by the banks. And now the government is trying to remove, because now people are trying now to own land there to for projects, for because they know that the future, in the next 10 or 20 years, these areas will be very, very important, and very I mean, will attract a lot of businesses. And now people are trying to own land there, and the bank is the owner of the land, because some people took money from the bank, and they didn't return the money. So the land is owned by the banks now, and some of the business from some businessmen. So now the government is trying to remove the indigenous people from their own land, because those people, they want the land. And now the government, because when the indigenous refused to be removed, the government started fighting them, sending some soldiers and fighting them there, and many of them were killed. So such acts is not going to bring the peace and the stability which we all of us look forward. And as the doctors said, that we need to work peacefully, and and that's what we hope for. But we need the other side to understand that without allowing these people to work and to fight peacefully in our courts, to talk to get the opportunity to talk to the politicians and to the powerful people, or where the decisions are made, I think that's not going to take us anywhere. And that's what I think. And otherwise we are going to be kept marginalized, and no one is going to be included in the government system, or in any, because when I say the system, the government system, it includes everything. I don't, whether it is jobs, whether it is where decisions are made, where to be employed, or to be part of any projects in our areas, in the areas that the government wanted to develop or open project in. And thank you very much. And let's go back to you, Mr. Nikhil.
Well, gentlemen, I think this is a very lively debate, and land, music, culture, identity, environment, these are all parcels of the indigenous people's struggle. And one of the things the indigenous peoples across the world have been looking forward is this particular day where they are recognized. And I hope our countries in the African continent will also uh, continue with a style of recognizing these indigenous peoples based on whatever their status could be. So let's play this the Gamo Elder song, then we will come back.
Abo bara sula, ne de badumensa, mitsa masha, alda da maldo adani, pure toka. Ai be mana mitsa adani gadeka, ne de tami baina tila bola, ula baina bosha sa godalwe, bonken selon tagina chucha doja, doje mala kantalina sana diba. No so gusa kaldina da yo taita isha shin sojina he de lo dema ne silaga shin daskina kaite kara kau gasarena balcha sida molto kanza o sole durcho mi choyo bashina sare woga Ankara baladu maineni highway. Awai fe biaga de del babumtai. Neni irke kaumalena wada tangai. Sharo amara de yomina mashka perai. Otolo kau gantona bilaga jai. Mata kansai de medo wazai. Nese farai aisi his kamalo kagitai. Osole durcho micho yobina sari tangai. Gede olia yomina wara damai. Atata, 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 ah, atata, atata. Ola Yosha esoi. Balta boko ira kaul ke na to na balgoi. Bonke kau dada na ye tara gadoi. Kau dada tara na zula gadoi. Balta kau halala na posha gadoi. Kamba kau dal ke na gala gadoi. Hanika kau ambula na washe gadoi. Zalanda na gamo na ambe gadoi. Ufa kau tule tolbana aisa gadoi. Gofa kau dada na kama gadoi. Aisi dada kama na aika gadoi. Ganta kau dero na ado gadoi. Dero ado na aisi tolba gadoi tolba kalsa gadoi. Nu aisi dorde kau ayaka na asge gadoi. Abo ke asa dubusha da aso lego shoi. Dubusha densa wade gakina jargoi uge gakin. Dubusha tagido adafe duka dendoi. Pituani gufen tani doga goi. Atumana machana pituan gufen ekidi. Oge aipetas efidi ula moidi moi. Atumana anjase na anjada. Na zoneni hedo ola pira wodoi. Machana yo anjase adeyeluni. Ke asa dubusada sole goshoi. Bonke kauda da tara zulana. Babile lastona udo michelostina. Tota kambe dorde la ka sole dulcho micheo. Yo bachina wase sarate matanga ishoi. Bolade.
Welcome back, gentlemen. Dr. Tadesse, this is a very moving, very indigenous song indeed. Can you tell us what the singer singing about?
This is interesting because this is, I think, about 80-year-old or so, this man, when he was recorded by an Englishman who resides in London during his visit in the early 60s. I don't think he's alive now. I do not know his name, but from his recitation of Keane and others, I can hear who he is related to. But I've so far failed to reach to the village and check with the people he mentions or their relatives to see who this gentleman was. And the subject of his song is a very, I don't know whether I have to say melancholic, but something wondering about the greatness, like Khalid said, of his people. But the greatness he explains not in terms of one centralized power, because in Gamo, we are over 55 communities. Power is, what is it? It's not centralized like in some communities. The 55 deres, we call them, they are highly decentralized. They have the power. If you go to one of the deres, you know where to sit or where to belong, or you'll find your own clan people. And clans cut across all these communities. And the kings may belong, of the 55 deres, may belong to different clans. And they are seniors in their places. And interestingly, I'm sorry I'm taking a bit long, you have a hereditary king and an assembly that's elected. So the king does not have absolute power either. So if he misbehaves, he has mainly spiritual and blessing power. Sacrificial, spiritual, and blessing. And the assembly does political things. They sees the day-to-day activities and decides on opening and closing of pastures, mountain pastures, and the start of agricultural season, and settles all kinds of disputes. So the 55 deres, what this man does is he speaks about the palace grounds of each country, each dere, and therefore brings together all of these from their remoteness. But even while being remotely located, there is this belonging, sense of belongingness and coming together. So what this song has done for me as a historical song is there was a dispute recently of villages saying they are different from the other and they have never been under this or under that, and we're different from the main group. We are this and we. So this man's song became one of the very few references that the palace grounds he sings for were not alien palace grounds, but palace grounds where he says are his, where he feels at home whenever he went there. So these have persuaded many people to revisit their history and togetherness. Though, as you know, how groups break from a major group. You know, in a family, the younger brothers have to leave the home in our tradition. So there are, in the dairy arrangement, there are the younger ones. So whenever the number reaches a critical kind of mass, then they move away from the home because they're adolescents or they've become adults, so they don't want to live under the control of the seniors. So that's what the song is about. Yeah.
Interesting.
That is very interesting, Dr. Tadesse. Indigenous peoples have beautiful culture. The indigenous peoples
Yeah.
have very strong governance system, like what you talked about, what the singer is trying to bring to picture. Khalid, this is not very far away from the indigenous peoples in the Benishangul Gumuz region. What do you tell us about the culture of the Barta, where you come from, and also how is the governance system traditionally?
It's interesting. Really, as I said again, I repeat it. All these indigenous people are the same because they have values, and when we see the government system in the world now, it didn't come out of the moon. It developed from the indigenous system. It developed from the indigenous system. For example, in our area, just you have the elders and who are elected. For example, for every village, you have the elders. We call them sheikh, for example, and the chief of the clan, and everybody abides by his rule and whatever he says. If there is anything that, for example, in our area in Benishangul and this extends to the Blue Nile in Sudan, when during the season of when the rain comes and the people go to the farm, and then instead of going by yourself, sometimes you gather all the village. They go to your farm and they help you, and you come, and the chief always is there, to address the people and to be one of the attendees. So this is how it goes. And but in terms even of the government system, we have all the kingdoms. For example, for us, we used to have the kingdom which was based in Sinnar in Sudan, and our people in a city called Fazuli, where close to the dam area today. These people, they sit together and they decide whether that king should keep his position or should be removed. Because if he does something wrong, for example, if you act badly and the people, for example, if you are corrupted, for example, they are not going to let you to continue. They just the elders decide that although you are a king and well respected, but they will remove you, and the same is going on until today. The chief of the villages, sometimes if they are corrupted and no one likes them, they get removed, and they put another one. Although there is, as the doctor said, there are some inherited positions for some families, but still they are not allowed to just to do whatever they want, and that's how the ruling system in our area goes. And always the elders have the say. Always the elders have the say in everything, and although a little bit it is just sometimes they should give the young people chance to speak and to say their what they want, but still the elders control everything. So but things, I think, a bit changing. It's a little bit changing now, because even the elders, they try to include the young people to listen to them, and so on. So that's how the things goes in back home. Yes,
Well,
back.
gentlemen, I think this is very interesting in terms of the governance system being similar across the board in the indigenous peoples' territories and indigenous peoples around the continent and around the world. But the interesting bit about this issue is the fact that their traditional leadership and political structures has always been ignored and being replaced by a system that is not uh, taking care of their need for that matter. I think we will have some more discussions in the future. But uh, regarding the indigenous people, always at the heart of everything is culture, land, environment, and so forth. Let's talk about land, and which both of you have mentioned before. In the indigenous people's territory, there is always a care for land, but the regimes seems to have a very limited understandings as to the importance of land to these particular indigenous people. In our case, in the recent years, I think there is this what is called land grabbing and also villagization program that was implemented by the regime. And these all have not had a consultation with the local and indigenous peoples of these territories that were affected. What do you say can be done better not to fall back into that land grabbing and these negative connotations in terms of the so-called development programs of the government. Dr. Tadeza, what do you say?
Could you repeat the question, please? What do I
What
say about?
about this land grabbing, which has
Mm,
taken, which the government arguably say that is for development purpose, and yet does not take into consideration the land need and the protection of the land of the indigenous people?
mm. Yeah, I think we can look at this from as people. Land, forest, pastures are crucial because indigenous people are land-based people. Land is their life. Land is where their traditions are inscribed. Their cultures can only be understood in relation to land and their universe and everything. The way nation states and those with big money view land is like a commodity. So these are absolutely completely different perspectives of seeing and understanding and using land. People in my community, for example, see land as something that nurtures you and you nurture your land. It helps you grow up and you help your land to be fat and give you more. It's an engagement with your land. You don't exploit the land. You don't talk about productivity. Productivity is a market language, not an indigenous language. Indigenous language is subsistence. You grow what you need and what's necessary for you, for your and for your animals. You grow trees that you may need to build a second, a third house, or for your children and grandchildren to use for construction, and for the birds. And you grow your crop, and birds can come and eat. You don't put anything to. You can scare birds, but you don't kill or poison birds. The same with hyenas, the same with everything. So it's a caring relationship with the land. And with the market, it's about profit. It pay as much and get the money back in as much with as much profit as possible. So it had also based on the world views of these institutions, the market and the general public. And now the world is understanding what the best way of handling land is and viewing land is, and what it means to eat healthy food and how it means to have sustainable use of agricultural facilities or land and so on. So land is the employer for many indigenous people, as well as for local populations, non-indigenous. So that is not viewed, in deep ways. It's not seen very seriously, I think. If people had seen the value, the wisdom of indigenous people, they would allow indigenous people to care for the land, where land that's cared for is like a child that grows with a good family. So with shiny hair and face and smiley and bubbly kind of household, that's how a good child in a family grows. But land that's doesn't have a good custodian is like an orphan child, usually ashy, dusty, with not taken care for, and so on. So you can see the contrast. You can, walking in a landscape, you can tell a land that has been abused or land that has been wisely and sustainably used. So these are the different ways in which indigenous people and others handle land. So whether this would stop grabbing and so on is dependent on many factors. I think land and people seem to be the only resources now available for governments to pawn. Nation states see them as an endless resource, and populations are a resource for governments, and land is. But there is now how you wisely connect your population and your land, and how what sense you make of them. You pawn it to the market, then you lose your land and its fertility, its sustainability, it's all the good qualities of your land. Because whoever contracts your land uses to maximize profit. But your own people, with the wisdom and knowledge they've had from generations, will use it as a king. They will handle it like a human being. They would nourish it, and the land will nourish them back. I think that's what I should say. And I think many know that, for example, with food, I think it's a UNEP document which said African farmers, organic farmers, African organic farmers, produce more than the highly advanced industrial agriculture. There is a document UNEP was once published in the late 90s, I think. So with the productivity of the land, by productivity I mean, but with the giving powers of the land, I think the African farmer knows how to tap fertility from its land at the same time as nourishing the land itself. So
Well,
whether nations, go ahead, sorry.
go ahead.
So whether nation states would continue doing in the end of the early 2000 kind of things with land dealing and concessions is, I think, to be seen. And it's very unlikely, according to my personal observation, very unlikely, because if you see huge lands that have been taken for development, those who promised to develop did not deliver what they promised they would deliver. They have not maintained the environment. They've wiped out forests. They've not delivered the thing they said they would deliver to local people, to food production in the country. And finally, they've said they're bankrupt and have gone away. So what have we left with? What are we left with? An environment that's been completely put out of use, a population that has been displaced, and lots of other, and the promise unfulfilled, and the debts unpaid. So it's blow 4 times, and it's unaffordable. It's not profitable. I think one would rather wisely use its own people to shoulder the responsibility. Because don't forget, we as a country are, I think, probably one of the very few countries where it is manually produced. And we've never sung for our producers who manually or with the help of their animals produce and feed millions of people. And I think from the Omo area Khalid was saying, food was transported as far as Desi, to northern Ethiopia. The Omo Delta fed lots and lots of people. Animals from the south were transported all the way to central Ethiopia. I mean, that's the market actually for animals. And yeah, so what is best for us has to be determined, obviously, by, and what's beneficial must be determined by people locally available, local populations and their government. And I think, I remember once the SNNPR president saying small-scale farmers are more productive than any other enterprises that he has known as the president of the southern region. So I take his words to mean serious, because that's why I think there was a policy of focusing on small-scale holders. Still, we are fed by small-scale farmers, and that includes indigenous people. And all the meat and everything we eat, people we do not have good statistics on the movement of animals. But still, the South Omo farmers are, I think, pastoralists from Asanich and other areas, used to be the best producers of beef, and they sent them to markets through traditional paths via Arbore, Konso, and the other highland markets, and the Boran cattle too. Boran pastoralists had taken them all the way to Gamo, for example, and Addis Ababa. And during the period of Emperor Haile Selassie, the thought in Ethiopian cattle raising institute, in the pastoral entrepreneur thing was to where Ethiopia could find market for Boran cattle. Whether this is the same at the moment, I have no idea. We do not have the statistics available. And I don't want to make comments on things I do not really have a reliable thing. But I recognize the creativity of Ethiopian farmers, indigenous and non-indigenous. The number of, they've got a variety of seeds in their custody, in their care. And I once experimented when I was working with the Christensen Fund, a small sorghum plot. And can you imagine a small community of Tsamai in the Omo, not in South Omo, but near the Waito River or River Limo, had 13 varieties of sorghum. They could label them, plant them in row, and show you the difference in color, in taste, and so on. So that wisdom is there. So I think it's up to the nation and its wise experts to very seriously look at this opportunity. And I think you'll not be shamed by the skill of your farmers and indigenous people.
Thank you, Dr. Tadesse. Khalid, you being from Benishangul Gumuz region, one of the regions that were targeted by the previous regime as to because of its vast fertile land, water, and also environment that is intact. What do you say about this idea that land grabbing that was previously was used to displace indigenous communities in Benishangul Gumuz, Lower Omo, and also Gambela region? What can be done better to protect the land of the indigenous people and also benefit the country in general?
Well, this is the point that I wanted you to address it, which is good. And before even I start this point, I hope that the doctor and you there, do something like forming any real body for the indigenous of Ethiopia, even if it is not a political one, even if it is just to protect the indigenous rights and in a very peaceful and just activities which is not at all related, have nothing to with the politics, if it is possible, because and okay, in regard to this, to your question, and the land grabbing and villageization also affected our land, and I think the doctor mentioned a very important point there when he said land for the government or maybe elites, certain elites are a revenue, and they use it just for revenue. It is a commodity. where they sell and to get something. And for the indigenous, it is different. It has different meanings because land is very precious for the indigenous people, and they respect land even more than they respect even their children, how precious it is. And that's why I think we, as indigenous, we are more related to land and we value land to the extent that uh, we feel peace and 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 security and stability when we are in our land, and we respect the land to the extent that we don't want it to be affected by anything, the ecosystem in general. And for example, for me, for example, when I go from here, because now I don't go to Ethiopia, I go to Sudan, for example, to Blue Nile. When I get a land, the plain lands in Khartoum, I feel myself as if I'm in a desert. I feel happy when I don't want even to stay for 1 or 2 days. I want just something to take me directly to Blue Nile. Why? Because I feel more connected there. Because that is where my ancestors from. That's where, because this land, Blue Nile and the Benishagol are the same people, are the same land. So whenever I'm back home, I'm connected to the land. I remember when Mengistu fell and we went back to Benishangol, and when the car crossed the border from Sudan to Benishangol, I was crying. I was crying from the border until I got to the capital city. And then whenever I come to the tree, mangoes, I see the mangoes and the trees and the bananas and all these fruits. Yes, I keep crying until people ask, who's this guy and who's this? By that time I was young, and they say, who's this child? And then they realized that someone told them his, and they were told, who is he? And who am I? And that's how we are connected as indigenous to our lands. How that we are connected, and for us as the indigenous people, in order to 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 have a new way of protecting our lands and our environment, I think that we cannot do that alone. And governments and organizations need to work and cooperate with indigenous people wherever they are, whether in British or wherever they are. And otherwise, because if the government doesn't cooperate with us, we cannot talk to ourselves. We need to talk to someone, and that is the government, people who are in power, and they need to listen to the indigenous people and their concern, and their concern should be addressed. Otherwise, the impact that they will have on the environment is going to have negative impact every year and every time. And I think now, due to the land grabbing and these projects in Benishangul, people are displaced, and people are going to starve and all these things, because we have seen that Benishangul area, we have seen many people starved historically. Benishangul is one of the areas that were never ever have been or never starved before, because people are in the farm, and we always rely on our food and our the the food that we grow in our farms and in our lands. So if the government keep grabbing lands and keep doing these projects like dams and the sugar plantation and all these things, I think people are going to be starved, and I think that no one wants it, whether the government or the indigenous people. And the agricultural areas should be protected, and pastoral. We should take care of the livestock also in our areas, and that means pastoral care. And uh, we need to educate our people more to take care of the environment, although they do more than anyone else, but still we need to teach them, educate them how to take advantage and to use the land, to take advantage of the land, at the same time keeping the land as it is without affecting it, and encouraging the indigenous people by uh, by uh, by providing them the technology that can help them to make production without affecting the lands, and especially, although they respect the land, but I mean, instead of using vast land to do something, they can use small land, and with technology small land can produce a lot of things for them, and which should they use. And at the same time, the government should make the indigenous day as the national day, and so everybody, because one of the things that the government, most of the governments are doing in Africa, is uh, when you are an indigenous person, you feel you are powerless, you feel you are marginalized, and you try to abandon your own community. Some, especially nowadays, the young people nowadays, they try to keep themselves away from their own communities, and because they don't want it to be as if they don't want to be related to those people, to the indigenous people, because they think that they are primitive, they are not educated, they are backward, and those things. And this, in the long term, it is going to have a huge impact in the country, whether it is economically or in stability and the peace and all these things. So I think if the government makes the Indigenous Day as the national day, and people, where people can have holiday and celebrate that day in communities and making functions, I think that will encourage the indigenous people to be more tied and more related to their own communities, and that's what we should do. And because there is nothing really we can do more than working with the government, and getting the recognition from the government. And that is where I think the intellectuals and the people who are in the power to realize that wherever, anywhere in the world, there are indigenous people, and those indigenous people have to be recognized. And recognizing them, it doesn't mean that you are going to lose them. You are going to encourage them to be more productive, to be more respectful for land, for the environment. And at the same time, you are going to make peace in the country and stability, which everybody seeks in Africa. Because in Africa, this is one of the problems that we have. If we see now Nigeria, for example, the Delta Niger, where the petrol is, the indigenous people land and the plantations were all uh, uh, were all destroyed by the polluted and destroyed by the petrol. And now that's where you find a lot of groups fighting against the government, because they think that the land and the water were polluted. So even the fishery is not there anymore, and the land is not there anymore, and the petrol is taken by the government and all the things. So, but if the government addresses the issue of the indigenous people, I think that will bring, and especially when especially with the indigenous, who brings always ideas and for I mean ideas and suggestions for peace. And always indigenous people, they don't want to get involved in fight or in destabilized areas. Indigenous always wants to live in peace, because they are always related to water, they are related to the land, they are related to all the things. So if the government addresses their issues and their concern, I think, and they will help in that. They will help with their ideas how to make peace, how to address their issues, and even they will contribute in it. So together, government and the indigenous people can solve this issue for the country and for the indigenous people, and that's the only way that we can do it. But you cannot say that the indigenous people can solve the problem by themselves, or the government can solve it by itself. The government and the indigenous people have to work together. And in regard to the Benishangul land grabbing, and I think what the government also needs to understand is there is nothing called as the state to own the land. This every person in his own region should own his land, and uh, but we have all of us we have to respect the government system, and we have to be under the banner under the government, and where and but the government, which government? It's the government which includes us, including us, and it's not the government that excludes us from the power and from participating in the decisions that they make. You cannot go and come and make decision to destroy my house without asking me, and when and how and why. So that's what I think, and I go back to you, Mr. Nikel.
Thank you, Khalid. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. As we conclude this important live show, I would want to pose a question. What can we do better next year when we are celebrating or when we are observing this International uh, World Indigenous Day? In Ethiopia, we have no legal regime that protects the indigenous people. There is no reference to that matter to the constitution. I mean, in the constitution of the country, the indigenous people seems to not to have a coordination effort across the country. And as Khalid said pretty well, I think there is a need to work together to ensure that the indigenous peoples of Ethiopia are recognized, their lands, their culture, their environment, their identity is protected. So, what can we do better, gentlemen, next year? Dr. Tadeze?
Well, I would start by saying something I should have said at the beginning of this conversation we have tonight. My views are personally mine. They do not represent the university's view on such issues, and my views do not necessarily represent my elders, Kamo elders' views. They are mine, although they are based on the universe in which I was brought up. They have not asked me to speak on their behalf this evening. So I just wanted to clarify this. So moving forward, what can we do until we have this next year's celebration of International Indigenous Peoples Days? Is I think we are in a turbulent time in Ethiopia without any place left for anything. So I think to contribute to the peace of the country would be the most important thing, because we can talk on things that make sense only from a clear mind, a peaceful environment. And all our indigenous people, with the minimum or medium or maximum peace they have, if they had the indigenous patience to see a better tomorrow, then I think I would urge them to focus on the nation's peace. That would pave the way for us for conversation, for truly and seriously looking into the various issues that pose a problem as we move forward as various groups in the country. I do not stand for any political group, nor do I want to belong to one. But I think we need the wisdom we say we have as Indigenous people, knowledge we have as Indigenous people, should all be used to make us think very seriously as to where we are heading, and to compose ourselves and to collectively think about our future. And it's in this thinking that we'll reconcile with our lands, with our people, with our languages, with our neighboring groups, contract contract oath ceremonies for peace with neighboring groups that will not interfere in their lives, will not entangle their lives, or that they would not do the same to ours. And every stream, every big tree, every sacred site is where I'm sure your people as well as mine have used to strike peace and secure peace. And it's only when we have peace that we can talk, even mourn the dead in a peaceful field, a mourning platform. Sometimes some people cannot cry for their dead. Already, COVID has made it difficult for us to mourn our dead. My sister has recently died, I think about a week, 2 weeks, and my relatives cannot mourn her death. So we need peace for everything, to grow our crops for the next season, for our animals to be safe, not to be raided by a vandal group that would vandalize everything. So I think we all need to and work for peace so that this moment comes where we can engage in conversation with people, with our elite, with our experts, and with our leaders. So I don't think there is anything better, because if in a dusty environment where there is a storm, we can't see clearly. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tadesse. Khalid, we have been really talking about this importance of this day in the struggle of indigenous people. The final word is in your end. What do you say? What can we do next year?
Yeah, there are a lot of things to be done, but you know what I love about Dr. Tadesse, it is good always to have elders in any show, because it keeps controls you from crossing some lines, and I agree whatever Dr. Tadesse said, and the only thing that I add is I hope really to see the Ethiopian government recognizing the indigenous and sign to be part of this body, and then that can allow the activists and the civil society activists to work with for the environment and for the indigenous people inside the country, instead of coming out and speaking from abroad. I think that is that one thing that I hope. And the other thing that I hope that to see by next year is that the doctor says that he's not associated with any political groups, and so I think being an activist I know he's an actor. He wrote many articles. He worked for organizations, and he put a lot of projects and plans for the indigenous around the world. But sometimes you need a specific time and a specific project for your own people. And I think this is the time now. I think for me, my suggestion is if it is possible, so he can lead any group of active of indigenous people who work organizations that can work for the indigenous people of Ethiopia, because always it is good to keep your house nice and tidy and good than just sometimes always than working for the world, because sometimes you need those people where you are going to where we are going to end up, all our life, all of us at the end we are going back to our land, to our ancestors, to be there, and because that's where we come from, and that's where we gonna end up with in. So I think if you can, people can work together to do something, in regards to the indigenous people of Ethiopia. That would be good. Even, and I hope it is not, as he said, that it is a child, just organization that has nothing to do with the politics. It's only just for the indigenous people how to educate them, develop them, and lift them up from where they are now today. And that's what I say. And we hope that I contributed to in this message in this show, and as also whatever I have said, it is representing me and my ideas as an activist. And that's whatever yes I have, and I go back to you, Mr. Mikhail.
Thank you, gentlemen, for everything that you have contributed. Thank you, Dr. Tadesse, for your time. Thank you, Khalid, for your time. Even if it is late in Australia, you have not even slept. You
Yeah.
are still with us, trying to really send the message out that Ethiopian indigenous peoples deserve a place in the in the political landscape or in the economic development of the country. They can contribute peace. They can, live with the rest of Ethiopian community. They can also contribute their land to the development of the country. Uh, so, with that, let me conclude this show. Viewers, I think this day is planned or supposed to be planned on the 9th of August, and the 9th of August being the day of the World Day of the Indigenous People, remarking their struggle for centuries now to be recognized at the international level. So today, my guests have contributed significantly on the way forward, how the Ethiopian indigenous people can be recognized, how can they also negotiate with the government to ensure that their land right, to ensure that their culture, to ensure that their environment, to ensure that their identity are protected by the legal system in the country. So we bring this show into conclusion, and we hope that you have taken and also the contribution that my guests have made means a lot to you, particularly those who are indigenous people. And next year, with the same program, we will come back by the grace of God, and we all will say thank you for your time as well. For please share everything with your colleagues and how this Indigenous Day has been marked by our guest and also the Indigenous media platform. Thank you.